Click. The dry, cold sound of handcuffs clicking together rang out sharply in the still air of the suburban night, a sound completely out of place and ominous amid the chirping of insects from the neatly trimmed trees and the gentle rustle of the night wind in the dense foliage of ancient oaks. $5,000, cash, clean, unmarked, right here, right now, said a policeman's voice, hoarse, deliberately drawn out, full of self-satisfaction and self-imposed authority, tinged with undisguised menace. He, Officer Frank Doyle, a white man in his late 50s, stocky, with a face lined with weariness, discontent, and perhaps bitterness, was leaning against the back door of an Oakmont County Sheriff's Ford Explorer. Or, he continued, his lips curling into a malicious smirk, a smirk that held no joy but only contempt. This beautiful, shiny iron horse of yours, he jerked his chin toward the Lexus, will be specially escorted by trailer to lie out in the dew at the county impound lot tonight. And you, he emphasized each word with purpose, his eyes narrowing as he studied the other, will be sitting huddled in a damp, stinking cell at the county sheriff's station, waiting until tomorrow morning to stand before the irascible Judge McAllister and try in vain to explain why we unbelievably coincidentally found a small plastic bag filled with a very suspicious-looking white powder carefully stuffed under the floor mat right under your driver's seat. You're smart, aren't you? Smart enough to understand the price of not being reasonable? The man leaning against the trunk of his Lexus LS 500, dressed in a perfectly tailored black Ermenegildo Zegna suit, showed no sign of fear or trepidation. Even though his wrists were locked in cold, shiny stainless steel handcuffs, a symbol of humiliation and powerlessness, imposed blatantly and illegally. His face maintained an unnatural calm, almost defiant. It was the face of an African-American man in his 50s, with sharp, intelligent features, a high forehead, and deep, razor-sharp eyes that stared straight at Officer Doyle, unabashed. He tilted his head slightly to the side, a small gesture that conveyed a cold, dangerous appraisal. $5,000, he repeated slowly, his voice low and even, without a trace of fear, but with a chill that was as cold as the mirror of a deep, icy lake concealing the raging undercurrents beneath. That's the price I have to pay to not have you, the law enforcement officers of this state, deliberately set me up with drugs, illegally arrest me, and destroy the reputation and career I've built my whole life for. Is that right, officer? His question, though asked calmly, carried a weight and irony that could not be ignored. The second officer, Officer Mitch Riley, much younger than Doyle, maybe in his early 20s, stood a few feet away, closer to the front of the Lexus, in the guard position taught in the academy. He tried to look tough and dangerous in the mold he had seen the veteran in, his hands clenched on his black utility belt, where his standard-issue Glock 17 pistol was securely strapped to a Kydex holster. But the tension, and perhaps even a hint of nervousness and uncertainty, were evident in the way he kept glancing up and down the deserted street on both sides, as if afraid some car or pedestrian might suddenly appear and witness the unpleasant scene, and in the way his shoulders hunched unnaturally, lacking any real confidence. "Don't talk to us," he tried to snap, his voice a little high and awkwardly mimicking Doyle's, in an attempt to increase the psychological pressure on the handcuffed man. "Do you have money or not? Just say it quickly and get this over with. Hurry up, we don't have all night to stand here in the dew playing cat and mouse with you." "Oh, I always have the money," the handcuffed man replied slowly, almost casually, a very discreet, almost imperceptible smile, a subtle and mysterious irony, flashing across his lips for a brief moment like lightning. "But I'm afraid," he paused, letting the brief silence add weight to his next words, his eyes still fixed on Doyle and Riley. "You're not going to like the way I'm going to pay that $5,000. Not at all. What the hell is really going on Magnolia Lane, the quietest and most secure street in the affluent suburb of Oak Creek Estates?" How did a well-dressed, well-traveled, expensively driven, and obviously upper-class man end up handcuffed like a criminal by two local police officers and faced with a blatant, sinister extortion offer and vicious threats from the very people charged with protecting justice and the safety of the residents? Is there any way he can escape the vicious trap that is slowly closing in? Or will he succumb to the abuse of power and bottomless greed that is unfolding before his eyes? And what does this mysterious, suggestive, and somewhat menacing way of payment he just mentioned really mean? Join us as we rewind the clock to just half an hour ago, retracing every detail of this fateful, dramatic encounter to discover the shocking truth hidden behind the ghostly quiet of the suburban night, and to witness an uncompromising confrontation where justice will be served swiftly, fiercely, and without any room for tolerance. Just 30 minutes earlier, a jet-black Lexus LS 500 sedan, the epitome of luxury and success, had been cruising the final miles of I-95, heading west toward Oakmont County, where a cozy home awaited its owner. Behind the wheel was Nathaniel Sterling, the current Attorney General of the state, one of the most influential and powerful figures in state government and the judiciary. At 55, Nathaniel Sterling was not only a model of African-American advancement in a field that had long been shunned, but also an embodiment of integrity, intellectual prowess, and an unwavering commitment to the rule of law and equal justice for all. He built a distinguished career at the top law firms before deciding to move into public service, and now, as the head of the state's law enforcement and prosecution agency, he is widely known for his extremely tough, uncompromising stance on all types of crime, from street crime to white-collar crime, and especially corruption and abuse of power within the ranks of public agencies, including the police force. This fierce and uncompromising stance has earned him the respect of the majority of the people, but at the same time has created many hidden enemies in the political and law enforcement sectors. It was a typical Thursday evening for him. He had just left an important charity fundraising dinner held at a swanky five-star hotel in the heart of the capital city. The event, which raised money for a scholarship fund for disadvantaged law students, had gone on much longer than expected due to the speeches and side meetings. It was now approaching 9 p.m., and he was tired after a long and stressful day of meetings on legal strategy, important prosecution decisions, and preparations for upcoming hearings. Though his body was tired, Nathaniel Sterling's mind was racing, a habit ingrained in him after years of intense legal work. As he drove home alone, he was thinking about the complexities of a massive corruption case involving several high-ranking officials in a neighboring county, for which his Attorney General's office was preparing to file final indictments next week. He was also sorting through his key points, numbers, and facts for a crucial press conference with the statewide media scheduled for 10 a.m. tomorrow to announce the successful conclusion of a major organized crime crackdown. To get home faster at this hour, avoiding the traffic that might still be heavy on the main highway, he often took a familiar route, turning off the highway and taking a shortcut through the exclusive, upscale Oak Creek Estates community. This was an area known throughout the state for its wealth, luxury, and privacy, to the point of being almost completely cut off from the outside world. The internal roads here wound, winding under the canopy of towering ancient oak trees, lined with magnificent villas of all architectural styles, from classic European to modern minimalist, each worth millions of dollars, discreetly hidden behind high, sturdy wrought iron fences, thick stone walls covered with vines, and meticulously landscaped gardens down to every blade of grass and flower. Although he lived in another well-off area in the same Oakmont County, he knew the roads in Oak Creek Estates quite well, having driven through it from time to time. His black Lexus LS 500, a luxurious but understated car that fit the scene perfectly, glided smoothly and almost silently on the smooth, empty asphalt. The car's matrix LED headlights illuminated the quiet, peaceful space ahead. He had no idea that in just a few minutes his presence, a successful, confident African-American man wearing a fine suit, driving an expensive car, on this road at this late hour was about to become the perfect excuse for an act of power abuse and vicious racial prejudice, a vicious trap that awaited him. At the same time, not far from the Lexus, a black and white Ford Explorer patrol car with the number 714 of the Oakmont County Police Department was slowly rolling down Magnolia Lane, performing a routine night patrol in the Oak Creek Estates area. Inside the patrol car, the atmosphere was heavy and sluggish. Sitting in the driver's seat was Officer Frank Doyle, a white man about 48 years old, with a military-style crew cut that was streaked with gray and a face lined with long-term fatigue and dissatisfaction. Doyle had been a patrolman for Oakmont County for more than 20 years, most of which had involved him dealing with complicated, tense, and sometimes dangerous cases in areas with higher crime rates, more dense populations, and much less affluent residents than Oak Creek Estates. As a result, he always felt extremely frustrated and somewhat bitter whenever he was assigned to patrol wealthy neighborhoods like this. In his eyes, this was a boring, meaningless task, just keeping an eye on the smug rich when other neighborhoods were in dire need of a police presence. That frustration, combined with deep-seated racial and class prejudices, the idea that wealthy people, especially successful people of color, were lucky, undeserving, or there must be something fishy, turned Doyle into an attitudinal time bomb, waiting to explode. Sitting in the passenger seat, trying to appear alert despite the end of his shift, was Officer Mitch Riley, a white man in his early 20s with a baby face and little experience on the streets. Riley had been out of the police academy for the past 2 years and had been Doyle's patrol partner for the past 6 months, an arrangement he both feared and struggled to learn. Riley often tried to please the veteran officer, sometimes going along with Doyle's jokes and biased remarks, though deep down he wasn't entirely comfortable with Doyle's negative attitude and sometimes overstepping his bounds. But Riley's inexperience and desire to be accepted in the harsh environment of policing often led him to stay silent or grudgingly agree. At that moment, Attorney General Sterling's sleek black Lexus LS 500 turned off the main thoroughfare onto Magnolia Lane, directly in front of Doyle and Riley's patrol car. The streetlights briefly illuminated the Lexus's cockpit as it passed under the lamppost, allowing Doyle to get a clear view of the driver. "Look, Riley," Doyle nudged his young partner in the ribs, his voice suddenly tinged with unhealthy excitement as if he'd spotted prey. "See that shiny new Lexus? That's expensive. And look who's driving it? A black guy wearing a nice suit, right in the middle of Oak Creek Estates. At this damn hour?" His racial and class stereotypes kicked in. In his narrow, suspicious eyes, a black man driving such a luxury car in a segregated area of the white elite at night could only be considered extremely suspicious. Something's definitely wrong. Can't be someone who lives here, probably stealing, dealing drugs, or at least hanging around with some bad intentions. Riley squinted at the Lexus as it cruised steadily ahead, keeping within the speed limit. "Looks okay, right, boss? He seems to be driving legally," he said hesitantly, seeing no obvious signs of a law violation. "What's normal?" Doyle snapped, annoyed by Riley's immaturity. "You're green and inexperienced, kid. You have to trust your instincts. In this business, instincts are king. I'm telling you, there's nothing normal about this. There's definitely something fishy going on." He made his decision quickly, without thinking. "Turn on your lights. Pull him over. We need to check this guy's papers." "But what's the reason for stopping the car, sir?" Riley was still a little hesitant, worried about stopping a car without a clear traffic violation, especially in a sensitive area like Oak Creek Estates, where residents were often well-connected and unafraid to complain. "Reason?" Doyle sneered contemptuously. "I saw him turn in here without signaling the required 100 feet. Is that enough?" Or do you want me to make up some other reason, like suspicion of drunk driving? Just stop him. Do as I say." Riley didn't dare to argue with his senior anymore. Although he felt a little uncomfortable, he obediently reached out and turned on the light control switch on the roof of the patrol car. Immediately, the red and blue lights began to flash continuously, illuminating the quiet road, creating a dramatic and attention-grabbing scene. He pressed the accelerator lightly, and the heavy Ford Explorer patrol car accelerated, quickly closing in behind the luxurious black Lexus moving in front. Riley turned on the electronic siren and let out a short, sharp sound, an unmistakable signal to stop the car. Inside the Lexus LS 500, Nathaniel Sterling immediately recognized the flashing red and blue lights of a police car in his rearview mirror. He frowned, a flicker of surprise crossing his mind. He was certain he had followed all the rules of the road. He had not exceeded the 25 mph speed limit on this road, he had used his full signal when turning onto Magnolia Lane, and there had been no other signs of erratic driving. Why was he being stopped? A vague sense of unease began to creep in, one that, even in a position of power, he sometimes had to deal with simply because of the color of his skin. However, with the experience and caution inherent in a man who has spent his entire career in the legal profession, he did not appear confused or panicked. He immediately slowed down gently, turned on his right signal, and calmly drove the car to the side of the road safely, stopping directly under a lit street lamp, ensuring a clear and visible stopping spot. He turned off the engine, applied the handbrake, and deliberately lowered the driver's window about halfway down, enough to allow for communication, but still maintain a certain distance. He placed both hands on the upper part of the leather-wrapped steering wheel at the recommended 10 o'clock and 2 o'clock positions, a clear gesture of cooperation, not of resistance or danger to the approaching officers. He sat up straight, waiting. The Ford Explorer pulled up a few feet behind him, its headlights shining directly into the Lexus's rear. The driver's door of the patrol car opened and Officer Frank Doyle stepped out. He walked slowly, somewhat hunched over toward the Lexus, one hand resting loosely on the pistol that was strapped to his hip out of habit, the other holding a large metal maglite flashlight that looked like a small stick. Officer Mitch Riley stepped out of the passenger door of the patrol car at the same time and moved quickly to the right, slightly behind the Lexus, taking up a tactical position, his eyes constantly scanning the surroundings and the driver inside, his hand also resting on his weapon. The stop seemed to be done properly, but the attitude was another matter. Doyle approached the Lexus's rolled-down driver's window. He didn't say the standard greeting. Instead, he immediately raised his maglite flashlight and shone a bright white beam of light directly into Nathaniel Sterling's face, an act that was deliberately offensive, arrogant, and disrespectful from the start. "Good evening, officer," Nathaniel Sterling said first, his voice surprisingly calm and polite, even though the intense flashlight beam made him squint and feel extremely uncomfortable. "Is there anything I can help you with?" "Driver's license and registration," Doyle ordered immediately, his voice gruff and hoarse, completely ignoring Sterling's question. His eyes roamed the luxurious interior of the Lexus, lingering on the modern dashboard, the high-quality leather seats, and then back to the expensive suit Sterling was wearing. His expression revealed the suspicion, the jealousy, and the ugly prejudices boiling inside. Nathaniel Sterling quietly, without argument, reached into the inside pocket of his suit and pulled out his Bottega Veneta leather wallet. He carefully took out his driver's license and slowly opened the glove compartment in front of him, taking out a stack of papers, including a valid car registration and a valid civil liability insurance card. He handed them all through the lowered window to Officer Doyle. Doyle snatched the papers from Sterling's hands rather roughly. He shined the flashlight on them again, reading the name on the license aloud in a deliberately drawn-out, slightly mocking tone. "Nathaniel Sterling." Then he looked down at the address on the license, in The Preserve, another wealthy and prestigious neighborhood about 15 miles west of Oak Creek Estates. He looked up, shining the flashlight directly into Sterling's face again, his gaze more closely scrutinizing, as if searching for a sign of deception or fear. "What the hell are you doing in Oak Creek Estates at almost 9 o'clock at night, Sterling?" Doyle asked, his tone as if he were interrogating a criminal caught red-handed, completely lacking in the least respect for a citizen, let alone the possibility that this person might be an important figure. "I'm on my way home from an event downtown, officer," Sterling replied clearly and patiently, still trying to remain cooperative. "I took a shortcut through the area to speed things up." "Shortcuts?" Doyle sneered, full of sarcasm and disbelief. "Or are you scouting the area for vulnerable homes? Or are you looking for opportunities to do some illegal business? There have been a few major property thefts in the Oak Creek Estates area recently. Did you know?" His words were now completely revealed for what they were. A baseless accusation, a racist and harassing act based on narrow and toxic stereotypes. Nathaniel Sterling took a deep breath, trying to control the anger that was beginning to flare in his chest. He knew that arguing or reacting aggressively at this point would only make the situation worse, especially since he was in a weak position, alone against two armed and clearly malicious police officers. He decided to try again, hoping that would make them back down. "I repeat, officer," he said, his voice still calm but now with an unmistakable edge and authority. "I am not loitering or looking for opportunity in any way. I am simply driving home. I demand that you cease this harassment immediately." But Officer Doyle didn't seem to believe Sterling. Perhaps he thought this was just a lie from someone trying to get away with something. He smirked contemptuously. "Oh, really? That sounds pretty normal. But here, on this street, at this hour, you're a suspicious black guy driving a fancy car. Now get out of the car," he ordered abruptly, his voice unyielding. "We need to check a little more just to be sure." Nathaniel Sterling realized that the situation had become serious. The officer was not only prejudiced, but also extremely stubborn and reckless. Continuing to argue or try to explain further at this point was pointless, even dangerous. He knew that by law, the police had the right to ask the driver to exit the vehicle during a lawful traffic stop. In order to avoid unnecessary escalation and possible unintended consequences, he decided to comply, but at the same time, he was prepared for what was coming. He knew he needed to gather evidence. In an extremely discreet and quick manner, as Doyle turned to signal something to Riley, he reached for his latest iPhone from the pocket of his jacket that was on the passenger seat next to him. With a practiced, almost imperceptible movement, he quickly pressed the voice recording button on the screen, making sure the microphone was facing outward and the screen was turned off so as not to attract attention. Then he gently placed the phone back in his jacket pocket. It all happened in a matter of seconds. "All right, officer," he said, his voice maintaining an outward calm, then slowly opened the car door and stepped out, standing tall to face Officer Doyle under the yellow streetlight. "Stand still! Put your hands on the roof of the car! Riley, search him thoroughly!" Doyle immediately ordered his partner, his attitude becoming increasingly arrogant. Riley approached, still looking a little awkward and uncomfortable, but he complied. He performed the routine search of Nathaniel Sterling, starting from top to bottom, patting down, checking the pockets of his pants and suit. Of course, he found no weapons, drugs, or other illegal items. Just a leather wallet, another cell phone, and some general personal items. While Riley searched Sterling, Doyle returned to the Lexus himself, opened all 4 doors, and shined his flashlight into every nook and cranny. He opened the glove compartment, pulled up the floor mats, looked under the seats, and even opened the trunk. He desperately hoped to find some small sign of something suspicious. A pack of cigarettes that smelled strange, a half-empty bottle of liquor, a tool that might be considered a burglar's tool, anything that might serve as a pretext, however flimsy, to justify his stop and search, to arrest Nathaniel Sterling. But the car was clean, tidy, and devoid of anything out of the ordinary. Only a black leather briefcase filled with work documents was neatly placed in the back seat. Frustration and frustration were written all over Doyle's face as he slammed the car door shut. He hadn't found anything. His original plan to catch a suspect, or at least find some kind of infraction to show off, had failed miserably. But his wounded pride, stubbornness, and especially greed were starting to get the better of him. He couldn't just let this rich black guy get away with it after going to the trouble of blocking and humiliating him like that. There had to be some way to cash in on the situation. There had to be some way to teach him a lesson and pocket some money at the same time. A much darker and more reckless plan began to take shape. "I still have a strong feeling you're hiding something," Doyle said loudly, his voice filled with false threat and certainty. He turned to look directly at Nathaniel Sterling, who was still standing with his hands on the roof of the car. "It may not be in the car, but on you, or you may have disposed of it somewhere." He moved closer to Sterling, his eyes narrowing sinisterly. "For the absolute safety of the officers on duty, and to prevent you from running away or attacking us or destroying any further evidence, I'm going to have to handcuff you while we conduct a more thorough search of the surrounding area, and possibly this car." To Nathaniel Sterling's astonishment, Officer Frank Doyle pulled a pair of shiny steel handcuffs from the leather holster at his waist. "Put your hands out! Now! Don't make me use force!" he ordered sharply. Nathaniel Sterling stood silent for a moment, looking directly into Doyle's malicious eyes. He knew this was a completely illegal act, a blatant and inexcusable abuse of power. There was no justification, no threat on his part to justify handcuffing at this moment. But he was also aware of the danger of the situation. He was alone, on a deserted street, facing two armed police officers, one of whom was clearly out of control and had bad intentions. Physical resistance at this point would likely only make the situation worse, possibly leading to unnecessary violence and endangering his own life. With extraordinary self-control, he decided to comply, to continue playing the victim, allowing these men to drag themselves deeper into their crimes. He slowly held out his hand. The cold metal of handcuffs rang out in the night as Doyle locked two steel rings around the wrists of the state attorney general, the head of the judiciary of the very state he served. An act of irony and the beginning of a dirty blackmail drama about to unfold. After successfully handcuffing Nathaniel Sterling, Officer Doyle's wild and reckless confidence seemed to increase exponentially. He felt he had the situation under control, had subdued this rich, arrogant black man, turned him into a complete prey in the palm of his hand. This was the perfect moment in his dark thoughts to make his final, most daring move. Turn this harassment and abuse of power into a lucrative blackmail operation. "Follow me," Doyle ordered curtly, shoving Sterling roughly and disrespectfully in the back. He led him toward the dark space between the Lexus and the patrol car with its flashing lights, an area more hidden under the shade of the ancient oak trees, where he figured the dash cam mounted on the patrol car's dashboard would have trouble capturing clear images and sounds. Officer Riley, though his eyes wavered, followed closely behind, continuing to act as lookout and becoming an unwitting accomplice in his senior's impending blackmail scheme. Once in relative darkness, far enough away to feel safe from prying eyes, Doyle stopped, turning to face the handcuffed Nathaniel Sterling. His expression had changed completely. It was no longer anger or frustration, but a sinister smirk, a gleam of greed and the smugness of someone who held the power of life and death in his hands. His voice had dropped to a whisper, but it was menacing and incredibly brazen. "Listen carefully, Sterling, or whatever your real name is," he began the blackmail play he had probably replayed in his head many times on other vulnerable victims. "Things could go very, very bad for you tonight, worse than you can imagine." He paused to let the threat sink in. "We," he pointed at himself and Riley, "have every right to hold you here for hours, call in backup, bring in dogs. We could search every square inch of this shiny car of yours, turn everything upside down. And you know what?" He tilted his head again, his tone full of meaning and ghostliness. "I have a very strong feeling that if we really try to search thoroughly, we will definitely find something that you accidentally dropped or forgot you were carrying in the car. It could be just a tiny packet of white powder, the cheap kind, tucked discreetly under the floor mat. Or it could be a cheap, unlicensed handgun, neatly tucked away in the glove compartment between the two front seats. Do you understand? Just one of those two things, that little bit of evidence, is enough to make your life go up in smoke, into ashes in just this one unlucky night." Riley, standing next to him, tried to sound tougher to support his senior's drama, though his voice was a little shaky. "That's right. You'll be arrested immediately for drug possession or illegal possession of a weapon. A mugshot at the police station. News will be spread in the newspapers, on social media tomorrow morning. Shame. Years in prison. Everything you've worked so hard to build your whole life will be destroyed because of one night of bad luck and incompetence." He tried to increase the psychological pressure, repeating the threats that he had probably heard Doyle say many times before. Doyle looked straight into Sterling's still unfazed eyes, making his final offer, the price of false freedom and cleanliness. "Or you can make things infinitely simpler. Simpler for you and simpler for us." He paused again, savoring the feeling of absolute power he held. $5,000. Cash, clean, no receipts, right here, right now. He held up 5 fingers in front of Sterling's face. "Give me the money, and we'll humanely remove your handcuffs. Forget all the misunderstandings that happened tonight. We'll help you into the car, and you can drive straight home, hug your wife and kids, and sleep soundly as if this fateful encounter never happened. A perfectly fair and reasonable exchange, right?" Nathaniel Sterling listened attentively to every subtle threat, every blatant and filthy demand for blackmail. Outwardly, he remained incredibly calm, not a muscle in his face quivered, but inside, a cold fury, a terrifying indignation was churning like a volcano about to erupt. He was utterly disgusted by this depravity, this blatant abuse of the power entrusted to him by the state and the people, this filthy discrimination based on race and class. He knew he had irrefutable evidence in his hands. The phone in his coat pocket was silently recording every word, every sound of this blackmail drama. He decided that he would not stop at just saving himself from this dangerous situation. He had to go further. He had to make sure that these 2 men in police uniforms, with the souls of criminals, paid the heaviest, most appropriate price for their actions, to serve as a deterrent to all others with similar intentions. He needed a little more, a final affirmation, so that they would have absolutely no way to deny or defend themselves. He looked straight into Officer Doyle's eyes, then glanced quickly at Officer Riley, who was trying to appear calm. His voice was steady, but there was a subtle change, as if he were actually scared and considering the humiliating offer. $5,000? So you don't find drugs in my car, and so I can go home?" he repeated, deliberately hesitant. "That's a lot of money. Are you sure? Sure this is the only way? Do you really know what you're doing? What will happen if this gets out?" He deliberately phrased the questions as if he was afraid of the consequences, hoping to make them more complacent and deeper into his words. Sterling's hesitation and seemingly fearful questions only served to make Doyle and Riley more smug and certain that they had the upper hand. They thought their prey was mentally defeated, merely trying to bargain weakly or delay the inevitable. Their patience was beginning to wear thin. "Stop beating around the bush," Doyle snapped, his tone becoming more aggressive. "We know you have money. Look at that car. Look at the clothes you're wearing. Say it or not. Where's the money? Or do you really want to try your luck at the Oakmont County Jail tonight?" He took a step closer, almost pressing against Sterling, trying to use his size advantage to intimidate him. This was the moment Nathaniel Sterling had been waiting for. The drama had been played out long enough. The evidence was clear and undeniable. The threats, the demands for ransom, the discriminatory motives, all were perfectly documented. It was time to bring the curtain down. It was time for justice to be served. "You know," Nathaniel Sterling said suddenly, his voice no longer hesitant or afraid. It was back to its usual calm, but this time it carried a new weight, a cold dignity that began to show, an invisible power that made Doyle and Riley, who had been so aggressive, suddenly quiet, sensing something was wrong, a sudden change in the atmosphere. For a police officer who has sworn to uphold justice, to extort money from a private citizen is a serious crime, a most heinous betrayal of his oath of honor and public trust. He paused, his razor-sharp gaze sweeping over Doyle's bewildered face, then Riley's pale face. "But the fact that you," he continued, his voice growing in intensity and hardness, "have the audacity to pull over a car without cause, to illegally handcuff, to threaten to trap with drugs, and to blatantly attempt to blackmail the Attorney General of the state you serve and are paid for." He shook his head slightly, a gesture of contempt. "That's more than a crime. That's an unimaginable level of stupidity, stupidity that will cost you very, very much." Doyle and Riley stood frozen, as if struck by lightning. They looked at each other, eyes filled with bewilderment and disbelief. The air around them seemed to suddenly become cold and thick. The Attorney General?" Riley stuttered out the two words, his voice trembling, almost inaudible. He began to feel a terrible fear, a feeling of constriction in his gut. Doyle, though his face had completely changed, white as chalk, cold sweat starting to break out on his forehead, still tried to maintain a last trace of false toughness, perhaps out of self-preservation, or because he still had a faint hope that this was all some elaborate hoax. "What? What the hell are you talking about? What kind of Attorney General? Don't you dare try that kind of bullshit on us." But his voice no longer had the arrogant confidence it had before, but instead revealed worry, panic, and growing doubt. "Am I just playing a trick on you?" Nathaniel Sterling smirked again, but this time it was cold, powerful, and unforgiving. "Then let me do something very simple to prove it. Release my handcuffs. Immediately." He moved his cuffed wrists forward a little. "So I can take my official identification card out of the special wallet in my suit pocket. I trust that once you have seen it, all your doubts will be cleared." His voice carried an undeniable challenge, an absolute confidence in the truth. There was a moment of tense silence. Doyle stared at Sterling's calm but authoritative face, then glanced quickly at Riley, who was shaking as if about to collapse. A fierce internal struggle was going on in Doyle's already murky mind. He didn't really believe Sterling's words. How could a state attorney general be driving alone at this hour and be so easily stopped and handcuffed? But on the other hand, the overly calm demeanor, the unwavering confidence, and the firm assertion made him feel a vague fear, a growing unease. Maybe out of morbid curiosity, maybe out of a faint hope that this was all a hoax and he could use it to torture the man. Or maybe it was just the latest in a long line of bad decisions. Doyle made the most disastrous decision of his career as a cop. He jerked his chin at Riley, who was still standing there, frozen. "Uncuff him!" Riley trembled, scarcely believing his ears, but he obeyed. He fumbled with the small metal handcuff key from his belt, his hand shaking so much he almost dropped it. He approached Sterling, barely managing to insert the key into the handcuff lock and undo the two steel rings that encircled the state attorney's wrists. Once his hands were completely freed from the cold grip of the handcuffs, Nathaniel Sterling slowly rubbed his wrists, which still bore the red marks of the metal. Then, with an extremely slow, deliberate gesture, as if performing an important ritual, he reached into the inside pocket of his elegant suit. He did not take out cash. He pulled out a special black leather wallet, the kind issued only to the highest-ranking law enforcement officials, with a metal badge on the outside. He remained silent for a few seconds, his cold eyes fixed on Doyle, then Riley, letting their tension and curiosity build. Then he slowly opened the leather wallet. Inside, in the dim but visible streetlight, were not green dollar bills or platinum credit cards. Sitting proudly on smooth black leather was a striking, shiny gold metal identification card. In the center of the card was the large state seal, exquisitely and authoritatively embossed. Below the seal were bold, clear, unmistakable words that carried a weight and a supreme legal authority that no weapon could match. Nathaniel Sterling, Attorney General. In that moment, time seemed to stop on the quiet Magnolia Lane. The chirping of insects and the rustling of the wind seemed to stop. Doyle and Riley stared at the shiny metal card in Sterling's hand, mesmerized, then looked up at his cold, authoritative face, then looked back down at the card again, trying to absorb the terrible, unbelievable truth that had just been revealed to them. Their brains seemed to freeze, unable to process this shocking information. And then, like a dam bursting, cruel reality crashed in, drowning them in a tsunami of horror and despair. Officer Frank Doyle's face was as white as a sheet, drained of blood. His eyes were wide with horror. Cold sweat poured from his forehead and temples, running down the collar of his uniform shirt. His legs felt as if they had no spine, and he staggered back a few steps, his mouth open but unable to utter a sound, only a ragged gasp. Officer Mitch Riley's reaction was even worse. As soon as he realized the terrible meaning of the card, he let out a choked cry, a mixture of fear and despair. Then his knees gave way involuntarily, and he collapsed onto the cold, rough asphalt. He shook like a man with severe malaria, his whole body crumpling with fear. No. No. Oh my God. Oh my God. He began to whimper, his voice breaking into sobs as tears began to stream down his pale young face. Oh. Oh my God. Doyle finally managed to get the words out, his voice hoarse and broken with uncontrollable terror and fear. He rushed toward Nathaniel Sterling, nearly tripping over his own feet. You! Mr. Attorney General! Oh no! Oh my God, what have we done? Please, please forgive us. We are so sorry, we had no idea. We really had no idea it was you. We are fools, the biggest fools in the world. Please! Riley, still kneeling on the ground, raised his tear-stained and desperate face to Sterling, who stood like a judge. Please, Lord, please, we've made a terrible, unforgivable mistake. Please don't ruin our lives. We're too young. We have families. What will happen to our wives and children if we lose our jobs, if we go to jail? Please, please have mercy. Give us a chance to make things right. We'll do anything you ask. Please. The two policemen, who had been so arrogant, patronizing, threatening, and blatantly blackmailing a moment ago, were now completely broken, prostrating, begging, pleading pathetically before the man they had just insulted and tried to frame simply because of the color of his skin, his car, and his clothes. The reversal was dizzyingly swift, incredibly cruel, exposing the full extent of the cowardice, patheticness, and contemptibility of those who abuse power when faced with the real consequences of their stupid actions. But Nathaniel Sterling, the state attorney general, had no compassion or hesitation in his eyes as he looked at the two broken and pleading men before him. His usual calm, which was a mask for an iron will and a strong belief in justice, was now completely gone. In its place was a cold, righteous rage, a deep disgust for the depravity and corruption that he had just experienced and witnessed firsthand from the very men charged with upholding the law. He looked at the two trembling and weeping men at his feet with eyes as cold as ice, without pity, only contempt and an iron determination to punish. Forgiveness? He repeated the word, his voice deep and deadly, each word ringing out clearly and sharply in the silence of the night, like the hammer of justice beginning to strike. Do you think you can use these cheap crocodile tears and petty pleas to erase what you have done? Do you think you can get away with it after trampling on your oath of honor? He took a step closer, his voice growing more forceful and powerful, causing Doyle and Riley to tremble even more. You wear this uniform, representing the law, representing justice, representing the safety of the people of this state. And what have you done? You have turned it into a dirty tool to spread fear, to satisfy your base racial prejudices and your bottomless greed. You dare to stop a car without cause just because of the color of the driver's skin. Dare to handcuff a citizen without cause. Dare to threaten to plant drugs in the open, and dare to blackmail the Attorney General of the state you serve and whose salary is paid by the taxpayers. He shook his head resolutely, his eyes never leaving Doyle and Riley's pale, frightened faces. No, he growled, each word etched into the air. There will be no forgiveness here. There will be no second chances for this kind of treachery and depravity. There is only one thing in store for you. It is justice, and justice will be served here now, swiftly and severely. Without hesitation, without wasting a second, Nathaniel Sterling pulled out his personal cell phone, the iPhone he had discreetly turned on to record, and it was silently recording the entire conversation, including the desperate pleas of the two police officers. He didn't bother to look at the recording screen anymore, because he knew he had enough evidence. He looked straight at Officer Doyle, who was still standing there trembling, barely able to stand. Nathaniel Sterling immediately dialed the direct cell phone number of Sheriff Brody, the sheriff of Oakmont County, on his phone screen. The phone rang only once and was connected almost immediately. Apparently, Sheriff Brody was always ready to take calls from this powerful official. "Sheriff Brody," Nathaniel Sterling said into the phone, his voice cool, calm but authoritative, giving no hint that he had just experienced a horrific event. "This is Attorney General Nathaniel Sterling." There was obvious surprise and a little confusion on the other end of the line to receive a call directly from the Attorney General at this hour. Yes, Mr. Attorney General. Is there anything urgent that I can help you with at this hour? Sheriff Brody's voice came through the phone, somewhat worried. "I am currently on Magnolia Lane, in the Oak Creek Estates neighborhood," Sterling continued, his tone unchanged, remaining cold and precise. "I was just pulled over by two of your patrol officers, Officer Frank Doyle and Officer Mitch Riley, who completely unlawfully placed me in handcuffs without any justifiable cause, and then attempted to extort $5,000 from me with the blatant threat of planting drugs in my car if I refused to pay." There was a deadly silence on the other end of the line for a few seconds, enough to imagine Sheriff Brody's shock and panic upon hearing the shocking news. Sterling continued, his voice becoming even more insistent and unwavering. "I demand that you, Sheriff Brody, and Captain Jenkins, your Internal Affairs Unit Chief, report to this location immediately. I'll give you exactly 15 minutes to get here, not a second more." He finished speaking and ended the call decisively, not waiting for any response or explanation from Sheriff Brody. Those 15 minutes passed in a heavy, suffocating silence on the deserted Magnolia Lane. Doyle and Riley stood like cursed stone statues, their faces ashen, their bodies still shaking, utterly broken, and waiting for the cruel fate that was about to befall them. Attorney General Nathaniel Sterling stood with his arms crossed, his back straight, his eyes coldly staring into the dark space ahead, his patience seemingly limitless. But beneath that calm exterior was a storm of righteous indignation, an iron determination to clean up the law enforcement apparatus. As requested, without delay, only about 12 minutes after the call ended, two black SUVs without police markings but with flashing emergency lights hidden under the grills drove in from two different directions and stopped a few dozen meters away from the scene. The car doors opened almost simultaneously. Sheriff Brody, a tall, gray-haired man dressed in plain clothes but still exuding the authority and experience of a county police chief, quickly stepped out of the first car. At the same time, from the second car, Captain Jenkins, chief of the Oakmont County Internal Investigation IA unit, a man dressed in a neat business suit with a stern face, and two other IA investigators also hurriedly stepped out and quickly headed toward the scene. As Sheriff Brody and Captain Jenkins approached, seeing Attorney General Nathaniel Sterling standing there with an indescribable cold expression on his face, his fine suit somewhat rumpled from the incident, and especially seeing his two officers, Doyle and Riley, in a pitiful state, bloodless, trembling and desperate, Sheriff Brody's face immediately became tense and pale with shock and extreme anxiety. He knew that this was not just a routine disciplinary incident. This was an extremely serious scandal, capable of causing a political earthquake, destroying both his career and the reputation of the entire Oakmont County Police Department that he had worked so hard to build. "Mr. Attorney General," Sheriff Brody approached, trying to keep his voice calm and respectful, but unable to hide his worry and confusion. I am deeply sorry for whatever happened here tonight. Please give us the specifics." Nathaniel Sterling wasted no time in pleasantries or empty apologies. He looked directly at Sheriff Brody and Captain Jenkins, his voice calm but firm, recounting the entire incident in concise, clear, and precise detail. From the unjustified stop, Officer Doyle's prejudiced and discriminatory words, being asked to exit the car, being searched, being handcuffed without reason, to the brazen extortion of $5,000 and the threat of drugs being planted in his car if he did not comply. After explaining the situation, he handed his personal cell phone to Captain Jenkins, the IA chief. "Here," he said, his voice icy, "is a recording of the entire conversation between me and your two officers, from the moment I was asked to leave the car until you arrived here. The evidence of their crimes is undeniable. I request that the captain's unit preserve and dispose of this evidence according to due process." Sheriff Brody and Captain Jenkins exchanged worried glances. Jenkins took the phone and quickly used a special device to listen to part of the recording on the spot. After listening to the first few minutes of the recording, Jenkins's stern face became even more rigid, while Sheriff Brody's face darkened with anger, shame, and helplessness. He turned to look at Doyle and Riley, who were still standing there trembling, with eyes that seemed to want to devour them. Faced with overwhelming evidence, and especially faced with the righteous fury and enormous legal and political power of the State Attorney General, who has the authority to investigate, prosecute, and oversee the activities of all county and state law enforcement agencies in the entire state. Sheriff Brody knew he had no choice but to act with extreme urgency and speed to appear serious, to try to salvage the situation, and to please the Attorney General. Any cover-up, tolerance, or leniency at this point would be political and legal suicide. "Doyle! Riley!" Sheriff Brody shouted, his voice filled with rage and authority, echoing across the empty street. "You two! You have disgraced this uniform. You have betrayed your oath of honor as a police officer. You have trampled on the public trust. You are hereby dismissed, effective immediately. Turn in your badges and Solgality weapons, immediately." The two IA officers immediately stepped forward, carrying out the sheriff's orders. Doyle and Riley, desperate and shaking, had no strength or will to resist. They fumbled to remove the metal police badges from the chests of their uniform shirts and pulled their Glock pistols from their waist holsters, placing them on the hood of Patrol Car 714 as requested. At that moment, they officially ceased to be police officers. But Nathaniel Sterling knew that firing was not enough. He looked straight at Sheriff Brody, his eyes determined. "Firing is only the first step, Sheriff. The actions of these two men are not only serious violations of discipline, but also blatant crimes under the laws of this state. They have attempted extortion, used their official power to intimidate, and illegally detained people. I demand, as Attorney General of the state, that you arrest Frank Doyle and Mitch Riley here, right now, so that they may face the fullest punishment of the law." Sheriff Brody hesitated briefly at the drastic request for an on-the-spot arrest. Arresting officers on the spot was often a delicate matter. But one cold, unforgiving look from Attorney General Nathaniel Sterling was enough to make his decision final, with no room for retreat. "Captain Jenkins," he ordered the IA chief, "immediately arrest Frank Doyle and Mitch Riley on criminal charges. Follow due process of law." The internal affairs officers sprang into action. They approached Doyle and Riley, clearly reading them their Miranda rights. "You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law." Then they pulled out new handcuffs, this time handcuffs designed for actual criminals, and locked Doyle and Riley's hands behind their backs once more. Doyle and Riley no longer pleaded or cried, only silence and utter despair as they faced the grim reality. They offered no resistance, simply accepting the tragic fate they had brought upon themselves. They were firmly escorted by the IA officers into the back of another patrol car that had just arrived on the scene. Attorney General Nathaniel Sterling stood there, arms crossed, back straight, his steely gaze never leaving the cruiser containing the two former police officers until it rolled down Magnolia Lane and disappeared into the darkness of the suburban night. He had made sure that justice was not just promised in words, but was delivered immediately, clearly, forcefully, and irreversibly, right where the crime had been committed. True to the determination and strong message that Attorney General Nathaniel Sterling had delivered on the scene, the legal consequences for former officers Frank Doyle and Mitch Riley unfolded with a speed and rigor rarely seen in a criminal justice system that is often notorious for its slowness and complexity. Under close supervision and informal but highly effective pressure from the State Attorney General's office, although the case was assigned to a team of experienced special prosecutors from the county to ensure objectivity and avoid direct conflicts of interest, everyone in the system understood the special importance and close attention the case was receiving from the highest levels. The proceedings were expedited to the utmost. With the undeniable evidence of the detailed wiretap of the entire blackmail and entrapment drama, along with the direct, hard-hitting, and authoritative testimony of the State Attorney General himself, the criminal case against Frank Doyle and Mitch Riley was considered extremely solid, with virtually no room for defense. The two were quickly formally charged with a series of serious criminal offenses under state law, including attempted extortion, abuse of official power, false imprisonment, and conspiracy to commit a crime. Additionally, the U.S. Attorney's Office at the federal level is considering additional federal charges of civil rights violations under color of law, as Doyle and Riley's actions were clearly racially discriminatory and a serious violation of Attorney General Sterling's constitutional rights. Faced with a mountain of evidence against them and the prospect of an extremely harsh sentence if the case went to trial before a jury, where public outrage and the Attorney General's reputation would certainly play a role, Doyle and Riley's defense team had little choice but to advise their clients to accept a plea deal as soon as possible in the hope of receiving some leniency from the court. Both Frank Doyle and Mitch Riley, in desperation and facing the prospect of years in prison, quickly agreed to plea deals to the main charges. However, given the extreme nature of the case, the blatant breach of trust, and the fact that the victim was the state's top law enforcement officer, the plea deals offered no significant leniency. At the sentencing hearing held a few months later, the presiding judge, a man known for his severity and impartiality, did not hesitate to strongly condemn the actions of the two defendants. He emphasized the dangers of abuse of power and prejudice in law enforcement, the betrayal of public trust, and the need to send a strong deterrent message to all other police officers that similar actions will never be tolerated and will be met with the severest punishment under the law. In the end, the court sentenced former officer Frank Doyle, who was identified as the mastermind and more stubborn, to 7 years in prison. Former officer Mitch Riley, who was younger, had a more subordinate role to Doyle, and showed more remorse during the proceedings, received a 5-year prison sentence. Both sentences were not suspended and had to be carried out immediately. Doyle and Riley were handcuffed by the police and led out of the courtroom in heavy silence, officially beginning their long days of paying the price behind bars for their stupid and criminal actions, ending their careers and lives of freedom in a humiliating and shameful way. The incident, although not widely publicized by Attorney General Nathaniel Sterling to avoid unnecessary speculation and protect his personal image, has become a typical example, a stern warning that he often uses privately in internal meetings with county, and city police chiefs across the state. He emphasizes the terrible consequences of abuse of power, of allowing racial and class bias to guide actions, and requires all law enforcement agencies to strengthen and improve the quality of mandatory training programs on professional ethics, anti-bias, respectful communication skills, and more effective and transparent use of dash cams and body cams. He also pushes more strongly for policies to increase civilian oversight of police activities and build a truly strict, fair, and no-holds-barred internal disciplinary mechanism. Years later, Attorney General Nathaniel Sterling continues to serve the state with the same dedication, integrity, and determination. He is remembered not only as a brilliant jurist and visionary politician, but also as a leader who faced head-on and dealt with the chronic problems and maladies that plagued the system he oversaw. The personal incident that fateful night on that suburban street did not intimidate or falter him, but only deepened his commitment to ensuring that justice is administered fairly and equally to all citizens, regardless of color, status, or circumstances, and that those who abuse their power and violate the law are held accountable to the fullest extent of the law. The story of the Attorney General is not simply a thrilling tale of the reversal of fortunes between the strong and the weak. It is a chilling reminder, an alarming testimony to the sad reality that racism, class prejudice, and abuse of power can still exist and thrive even among those entrusted with the duty of upholding the law, even in the most civilized, safe, and peaceful parts of our society. But more importantly, it is also a powerful testament, a resolute affirmation of the ultimate principle that no one, no matter how powerful, no matter what uniform they wear, is allowed to stand above the law or to trample on the rights and dignity of others. It shows that, although those at the highest positions in the system can become victims of injustice and prejudice, they also have the power, responsibility, and courage to use their position to demand justice strongly, decisively, and uncompromisingly. The immediate and severe punishment of Frank Doyle and Mitch Riley is not simply a price to pay for the criminal acts of two depraved individuals, but also a painful lesson, a strong warning to the entire system about the paramount importance of accountability, about the inevitable and severe consequences for anyone who dares to betray the public trust and dares to challenge the most basic principles of justice and morality. How do you feel about Attorney General Nathaniel Sterling's extremely strong reaction and decision to immediately arrest him after his true identity was revealed? Was it a necessary and justifiable demonstration of strict justice in such a blatant case of abuse of power and extortion? Or do you feel it was somewhat beyond the bounds of normal procedure? Please share your honest thoughts and feelings about this story and how justice was served so quickly and decisively in this extraordinary case.